When Mr. Angelo Agrizi testified before this commission earlier this year, on one or two of the days, part of the evidence that he gave related to or included persons that he said had received bribes from Bosasa within the Department of Correctional Services. And he mentioned or suggested that one of those persons was Miss Jabulile Elizabeth Sishuba, who was employed by the Department of Correctional Services at a certain time. Since then, Ms. Sishuba has brought an application to this commission in terms of which she has asked for an order that Mr. Agrizi should be called back to the commission to give evidence and to state that she, that is Ms. Sishuba, never received any payments or bribes from Bosasa or any of the entities relating to Bosasa, or if he is unable to say so, then she sought leave to cross-examine him. Ms. Sishuba's application was given to Mr. Agrizi, who deposed to an affidavit subsequently in which he made it quite clear that he had made an error in suggesting that Ms. Sishuba had been paid any bribes or any monies from Bosasa or any entities connected with Bosasa. He said that this had been a result of confusion and indicated that he was apologizing to Ms. Sishuba and that if he came back to the commission, he would make it clear that Ms. Sishuba had not received any bribes from Bosasa. Subsequent to that, Ms. Sishuba deposed to another affidavit where she acknowledged the admission made by Mr. Agrizi, but took issue with the fact that Mr. Agrizi had said that he had made a mistake as a result of a certain question that he had said Mr. Pretorius had asked him, and she suggested that Mr. Agrizi was not taking full responsibility, and also sought that the apology that Mr. Agrizi should make should be in specific terms that she formulated. Written submissions have been made by both sides, and Ms. Sishuba persists in her application, but now understand her not to seek any cross-examination of Mr. Agrizi, but only seeks to have an order, to be granted an order that will compel Mr. Agrizi to come back to the commission and make an apology in the terms that she demands. I'm satisfied that Ms. Sishuba was justified in bringing an application for leave to cross-examine Mr. Agrizi. I am not sure about the relief of compelling him to come back to the Commission, but it is not necessary to decide that issue. The fact of the matter is that the plans of the Commission are such that Mr. Agrizi is going to come back to the Commission in order to give evidence and to be cross-examined. And he has already indicated that on that occasion he will be prepared to repeat what he has said in his affidavit, namely that he made an error in suggesting that Ms. Sishuba had been paid any bribes by Bosasa or any entities from Bosasa, and that he apologizes for his error. He has even indicated in a later affidavit that he takes full responsibility for that error. Therefore, it's clear that there is really no dispute of fact between the version put up by Ms. Sishuba, namely that she never received any payments or bribes from Bosasa, and Mr. Agrizi's version after this issue was drawn to his attention. That therefore means that there is no basis for me to grant Ms. Sishuba leave to cross-examine Mr. Agrizi in relation to the issue of whether or not she had received bribes from Bosasa. So the only issue is whether I should make an order compelling Mr. Agrizi to come back, and whether I should order that Mr. Agrizi should give his apology in the specific terms that are being sought by Ms. Sishuba. One, since Mr. Agrizi has undertaken to make the admission or to repeat his admission and to repeat his apology when he comes back, and since he is going to be back in the Commission, and he has said he takes full responsibility for the error that happened, I see no reason why I should make an order compelling Mr. Agrizi to come and do what he is going to do anyway. There is no basis to think that he is not going to come back because, one, the Commission does plan to get him back to the Commission to give further evidence, and two, because he is prepared to come back and clarify the issue. With regard to whether or not I should order him to make an apology in the specific terms sought by Ms. Sishuba, I am unable to accede to that request. I think it is enough that Mr. Agrizi has said, one, he made an error by suggesting that Ms. Sishuba had received bribes from Bosasa. Two, he said he takes full responsibility for that. Three, he said he apologizes to Ms. Sishuba for that. Four, he said he will repeat all of this when he comes before the Commission next time. In those circumstances, I don't think that there is a need for an order. I must just make it clear, as I have said, that I accept that Ms. Sishuba was justified in bringing the application, but I believe that the developments that have happened since then make it unnecessary for me, or inappropriate for me to make an order to the effect that he sought. In these circumstances, although Mr. Agrizi will come before the Commission and publicly apologize to Ms. Sishuba in due course and make it clear that he was mistaken when he said she had received bribes, it is not necessary to grant the orders that it is inappropriate to make the orders that Ms. Sishuba asked for. In these circumstances, the application is refused.
Thank you, Chair. Noted.
Thank you. We are going to adjourn now and we'll resume at 10 for the hearing of evidence. We adjourn.
All right.
Good morning, Mr. Norman. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Are we ready?
Yes, thank you, we are, Chair.
Yes.
Chair, this morning we intend leading the evidence of Mr. Madoda Mxakwe.
Yeah, it looks like somebody keeps on getting the spelling of his name wrong.
Yes,
I
I've
saw
noticed
somewhere
that.
they wrote something, and I see here on what I'm looking here, it's written
They are missing an A.
Madoda.
Yes, in the divider.
Please
Okay.
make sure that everyone's names and surnames are spelled correctly.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, actually, this is just so bad. I mean, he is Madoda,
Yes.
and here it's written Madoda.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay,
The
okay.
witness is present, Chair. May he be sworn in? The files, maybe just before he's sworn in. I have asked the registrar to place before you, Chair, Exhibit CC5 to 16, plus Exhibits 26 and 27.
I'm sorry. May I ask you to start again? I was
Looking
attending
for
to
it.
something else, yes.
Yes, Chair. Chair, before you, you will have Exhibits 5 to 16 and Exhibit 26 and 27.
Yes. Will 26 and 27 please be written
This
with
is the
a
legislation
marker?
file, and the other one will be reports.
With a marker, they've written with a pen, and I think a marker will make it much more
Neat.
easier.
It will be attended to, Chair.
Yes, and well, the liver arch file is exhibit CC.
5 to
05.
16, yes, yes. Chair.
Yes. Okay.
And then, Chair, I had asked the registrar to open up Exhibit CC 15, which is where the
Yes.
statement of this witness is.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I've got that.
Thank you. May the witness be sworn in, Chair?
Yes, please administer the oath of affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Madoda Mxakwe.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No, I don't.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes, I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you may proceed then,
Yes,
Ms.
thank you.
Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mxakwe, you've got before you the liver arch file that I've placed before you, and next to you, you will see there's Exhibit 26 and 27 on your left-hand side in that box.
Yes.
Yes, 26 and 27, they've been placed. Those are the files that you'll be referring to this morning.
Okay.
And your statement, as you have opened, is under the divider marked 15. Do you see that?
Yes,
No,
yes, I can.
Yes, thank you. Could you please identify the statement that appears at pages 1 to 15? Is that the initial statement that you made to the Commission?
Yes, it is.
And it has annexures to it, annexures A to E.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll just like to take you to page 15 of that. Can you please turn to that page? Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and I see no date was put in when this oath was administered for you. When did you have this commissioned?
On the 14th of August.
14th of August.
Yes.
Where did you do it?
I did it in Johannesburg.
Yes, and an attorney administered the oath.
Correct.
Yes. Then, if you go to page 49 to 63, that is a supplementary statement which you submitted to the Commission.
Yes,
And-
it is.
Yes, I would like you to go to the last page of that statement and identify it. This was done yesterday, 2nd of September.
Which page is it?
I beg your- page 62. If you go to page 62.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And the date there is the 2nd of September 2019,
Correct.
and it was commissioned here in Parktown.
Correct.
Yes, thank you. These statements that you made, both of them to the commission, did you make them voluntarily?
Yes, I did.
And are the contents of both the main statement and the supplementary true and correct?
Correct.
Yes, thank you.
The only thing, if I may, on page 9, there's a typo there. It says from 2012 to 2018. It should read from 2018 to 2019.
To 2019.
Yes.
Yes, maybe just to cure the defect on the commission, on the oath, one would have to do a supplementary where you can confirm that this statement, the initial one that you submitted, was signed on the date which is not reflected on it, and also we'll do a supplementary dealing with the date that you're asking the chair to amend.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, and then, Ms. Norman,
Yes, Chair.
I see that the Commissioner of Oaths, in regard to Mr. Mxakwe's supplementary affidavit, was somebody connected with the Commission. I think normally what is required is that the Commissioner of Oaths should not be connected in any way with your attorneys or the institution. So I think commissioners and other members of the legal team must be advised that as far as possible, witnesses, when they depose two affidavits that will come before the commission, the commissioners of oaths should not be anybody connected with the commission.
Oh, yes, Chair. I'll
Yeah.
see that statement. Yes, we'll advise them accordingly, Chair. This is a
I
constable.
think it's the
or
second one
constable, all right.
that I notice has got a commissioner of
Yes.
oaths who is connected to the commission.
We'll do that, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mxakwe. Could you just briefly tell the chairperson about your qualifications?
Chairperson, good morning. I hold a
Good morning,
master's,
Mr. Mxakwe.
a master's degree in global political economy from the University of Sussex. Also an honors and a master's from UCT, and a postgrad diploma in business admin from GIBS, as well as executive leadership development training from the London Business School.
And then
No, thank you. I noticed, Ms. Norman, that I must be old-fashioned because I see that Mr. Mxakwe, when he states his qualifications, he starts with the most recent,
Yes.
the highest, and goes down. And I think Mr. Makhathini did the
Did the
same
same,
yesterday.
Yes.
And from time to time, I see CVs where people start with the latest developments in their
Yes.
lives and go back.
To
But
metric.
some of us are used to starting
Start
at the
with your
back
metric
and
certificate.
coming this way. So maybe it shows that some of us have been around for a long time and are not changing.
Yes.
We'll try and adapt.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mxakwe, is it correct that you are currently the Group Chief Executive Officer of the SABC?
Yes, it is.
When did you join the SABC?
I joined the SABC on the 1st of July, 2018.
Yes. Maybe just briefly, could you just give the chairperson background about your work experience before you joined the SABC?
Before I joined the SABC chairperson, I was the executive director for a multinational company for the southern as well as the Eastern African region. After that, I then went to work in Europe as the vice president at the headquarters of the same multinational. And then I then came back, after being there for 4 years, I moved to Lagos, Nigeria, where I was the commercial head for Lagos. And in 2015, I returned home, and I was then the country head responsible for the commercial operations in 5 countries. And after that, I then joined the SABC.
Yes, no,
Thank
thank you. Ms. Newman, before you proceed,
Yes, Chair.
I went to Ms. Mxakwe's supplementary affidavit, and then when I was supposed to go back to his original affidavit, I got lost. Which divider must I go to?
Chair, there's the one CC 15.
Because that's the one you are dealing with now.
That's the
isn't
one
it?
we're dealing with.
Yes.
Chair. Is there no divider between 15 and the supplementary?
No, no, you must
Between the
just remind me the divider. Is it 16?
It's 1-5, Chair.
1-5, okay. Okay, I've got it.
Thank you, Chair. May I proceed, Chair? Yes. Thank
Yes,
you.
you may proceed,
Thank
yes.
you. Then, as the Group Chief Executive Officer, could you just tell the Chair what is your role within the SABC, briefly?
My role, Chairperson, as the Group CEO of the SABC, is to ensure the strategic direction of the organization. Very importantly, to make sure that every single individual and every single division is geared towards the fulfilling of the public mandate of the SABC. I'm also responsible for, as the accounting officer, for the financial management of the organization, but also to provide leadership to the different divisions within the SABC.
Yes, thank you. You were present when the chairperson of the board testified yesterday, is that correct?
Yes, I was.
And most of the strategies he had covered, but I'll just take you to some of the things that would relate to you as the group CEO. First of all, could you just turn to page 2 and where you deal with the revenue streams of the SABC in paragraph 4.1. Could you just mention those to the chairperson, please?
Chairperson, our revenue base from a commercial point of view is divided into 3 streams. The first one is 84% of our revenue is generated through advertising sponsorships. The second one is through TV licenses, about 15% of that. And then from the government grants, we get about 3%. Just to give you a sense, last year, and these are unaudited financials, but last year the total revenue was at 6.5 billion, and 200 million of that was from government. The rest was from the revenue generated through advertising, and then 8 billion of that was from TV licenses.
Yes, thank you. And the chairperson did mention yesterday, and as you've mentioned in paragraph 6, some of the documents that you found at the time of your appointment, being the Public Protector's report, ad hoc committee, report of Parliament, and internal audit reports that were there, and the special investigation reports. You confirm that those are mainly the reports that you were working from?
Yes.
I beg your pardon, sorry. And what I would like to take you to is what appears at page 3, because these are matters that would fall within your knowledge and that of the financial officer who's going to come later. You deal in paragraph 8 with the Auditor General's reports that had indicated collapse of governance within the SABC. So how have you now, having been now at the helm of the SABC, how are you dealing with those?
Chairperson, the SABC for many years was subjected to systematic collapse of governance as well as financial processes. And you see this in the manner in which there was a complete disregard for SABC policies as well as SABC processes, but also a huge lapse when it comes to internal controls and governance processes. And what we have done, and we've been on record on these, we have looked at all of the recommendations of the Public Protector, the recommendations from the ad hoc committee, as well as internal forensic investigations by the SABC. In my career, I have never come across an organization where in one fiscal you have close to 186 reports. And those reports would be documenting malfeasance, fraud, corruption. And I think if you say 186, the tendency is to think that it's individual employees. That 186 refers to cases, because one case can actually focus on a group of people. So what we've been doing, and I say the mantra that we use is to always
I'm sorry, Mr. Mxakwe, when you refer to 186, you talk about 186 cases of wrongdoing.
Based on the internal investigations that have been done, correct.
And those investigations amounting to the same number, 186, or not really?
They don't amount into the same, the cases, but the
cases
individuals
that they deal with.
More.
Yes.
Correct.
The cases that they deal with are in that region.
Correct.
Okay, yes, thank you.
So what we've then been doing, and in every single thing and in every single case, we've ensured that we follow due process. Disciplinary measures had to be enacted in every single case that is concerned. And I've said this, we have to do what is right for the SABC. And the manner in which we do this is very transparent. You go through the necessary disciplinary processes, and it does not matter who you are. And we've been subjected to a lot of backlash as a result of this. And as I said to the team, every single investigation and every single case needs to be dealt with in line with our internal processes. So to answer the question, we are dealing with all of those cases, but at the same time we're strengthening internal corporate controls when it comes to these, particularly in as far as adherence to the SABC policies are concerned.
Yes, thank you. And then in paragraph 9, you deal with irregular expenditure, which stood at 4.98 billion as of 31st of March 2018. So the question is now, if you, from the time you were appointed, you were trying to do the right thing, why, where does this 4.98 billion come from as constituting irregular expenditure?
I'm sorry, Ms. Norman. Please don't forget your question.
Yes.
Mr. Mxakwe, on these 186 cases, are you able to say at this stage how many have been finalized in terms of dealing with them, in terms of your internal processes to deal with them, insofar as they may relate to employees who have been involved in wrongdoing and so on? Or is that something that's not easy to say right now?
No, it is easy to say, Chairperson. There are two streams. There are investigations that are done by the SIU, and when they report back to us in terms of their findings, we institute the required consequence management processes based on that.
Yes.
And overall, internally, we have had about 86 of these cases dealt with. And there's about 38 that are still outstanding, and the process is continuing. I do know that the HRGE will be here to give specifics, but there's been a lot of progress. But I think also, Chairperson, if I may add, it's a never-ending process. Every single day I'm confronted with reports that date back to 2012, 2011, 2014, on cases that were not attended to, deliberately sometimes. And we have also a duty as the SABC to do what is right. And in the process, we have to ensure that we follow due process in all of these cases. So we do have different numbers and different cases where we know that we've completed these.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I could mention to Chair that most of those are in the files of Mr. Zgode, the 10 liver arch files.
Okay.
Yes, thank
you.
We'll deal with them when it comes. Thank you. The question was, how then does one find so much irregular expenditure? I know it was before your time, but this is as at 31st March 2018.
Chairperson, the paragraph 9 depicts the rot and the malfeasance that has taken place at the SABC in the past number of years. Those irregular expenditure figures, they date back to 2012. you will see year on year, there is an increase on this. And there's 4 reasons why. The first reason is that there was a blatant disregard for the supply chain processes of the SABC. The second one, which was really commonplace, was the payments of certain contracts, of certain deals without having a proper contract in place. The third one was deviations. And these deviations were deliberate because they were not even in line with the criteria when it comes to emergency, for sole source, or they were not even approved by Treasury. But the fourth one was the sense, or rather the fact that there was a practice of ensuring that the management then would go through the request for quotation instead of going through a competitive bidding process. So the accumulation has been year on year. It's something that started in 2012. You will see there is an attachment that we've included here where it actually specifically shows which contracts were not done properly and why is it, as we stand, we have the 4.98 billion. In terms of the second question that you're asking, we have applied for condonation to Treasury of 2.7 billion of all of these. And this is based on the fact that some of these cases may have been concluded. Some of them are going through litigation with the SIU and so forth. So there is a system in place where we ensure we apply. But at an operational level, we've put together a team that looks at automating all of these irregular expenditure items. And the idea there is to ensure internal controls are in place. There's a framework that can properly monitor where we are in terms of these. And the third point, because of the high number, in fact, year to date, it's at 5.2 billion in terms of irregular expenditure. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts has asked us every single month to submit progress reports on how we're dealing with this irregular expenditure.
Yes. And this irregular expenditure, you've got to reflect it in your books on a yearly basis. And you can't now say, look, because it was not part of our term, it will not be reflected. So it continues reflecting as irregular expenditure, even though you are not involved in it at the time.
Correct. As leadership, you inherit both the good and the bad.
Yes.
And in this case, the assets as well as the liability.
Yes. And then...
well, I'm sorry, Mr. Norman.
Yes.
Now that Mr. Mxakwe has made reference to SCOPA,
Yes.
I just need to mention this, and you and the legal team can take it forward and we can discuss in due course. I would like in due course to have a documentation that will tell me what was happening over the years whenever the SABC went to the relevant portfolio committee in Parliament, whether it was the Communications Portfolio Committee or SCOPA. I would like to see what was said about issues relating to matters that we are dealing with. Because one of the things that I want to understand is to what extent did Parliament play its proper role in terms of oversight, to the extent that matters have really got to a completely unacceptable level in terms of things of wrongdoing and corruption and fruitless and wasteful expenditure over years. Where was Parliament probing those matters? What were they doing about the information they were getting? Or were they not being given correct information by the management and the board over the years, or the boards. So at some stage, I need to have that information.
Thank you, Chair. We've noted
But
it.
let's continue.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Then in paragraph 10, you confirm what the chairperson confirmed yesterday.
Indeed, the SABC is technically insolvent. And I think, Chair, the way you would need to look into this is to look at the short-term liabilities that exceed our current liquid assets. Simply put, we cannot and we are not able as the SABC to pay our creditors. To date, we're standing at 1.8 billion. And if I may also, if you go back to the previous fiscal at the end of March 2018, that number was standing at 1.2 billion. But it increased because we have not been able to pay Centec, we have not been able to pay MultiChoice and some of our creditors. The biggest issue with that paragraph is then the issue around the solvency and the liquid test of the SABC. We run an organization, Chairperson, where every single month employees are very depressed. They do not know whether they're going to be able to get their salaries or not. And the only thing that we focus on every single month is the 265 million that is dedicated towards paying salaries. Once we've done that, we actually have absolutely nothing left. We then have to get into engagements, into arrangements with all of our creditors. And they've been extremely understanding, but you cannot go on like that. Despite the solid strategy that we need, we have. And I must admit also, when I took this job on the 1st, my understanding was that there was capital reinjection that was expected. Because, Chairperson, it does not matter how robust and solid a strategy you have. If that is not recapitalized and there is no financial injection, it cannot work. And the only reason why the SABC has been able to stay afloat as it has, it's thanks to the commitment and the hard working and the passion that has been displayed by many of our employees. So this statement is indeed correct that the company is technically insolvent.
You know, it's very worrying. It's very worrying. The chairperson of the board was saying exactly the same thing yesterday. And we all know that it's not just SABC. There are issues with SAA, ESCOM, Denel. There have been over the years ministers responsible for these entities. There have been CEOs, there have been CFOs, there have been boards. Parliament has been there to oversee, to exercise oversight. How did all of these things happen when there were all these people? How did we get to a position where state entities have reached this level? It's a very, very worrying thing. I guess I'm just asking a question that many of us are asking, but it's a sense of frustration to say, what is it that as a country we got wrong? If the position is that so many structures appear to have failed to make sure that these SOEs didn't reach the level that they have reached now. Yes, Mr. Mxakwe, I guess I'm just saying things and you don't know what to say in return.
No, Chair.
Yes.
Chairperson, we inherited a mess. An organization that was really in financial ruins. But what gave me, or what still gives me comfort, is that you have an executive management team with the required business acumen, with the required commercial astuteness, ethical leadership, the passion to serve the country. And the only reason why the SABC, despite the lack of financial injection, has been able to stay afloat in the past couple of years is because of the competence that we have in the team. The strategy that we've put in place has already begun to show positive green shoots. And I can assure you, Chairperson, that if you look also at our funding model, we as an organization, if we were to get the required funding, which, by the way, we believe we've met the preconditions for, we have a team that is solid that can be able to turn around the SABC. And I think the biggest question that needs to be asked, politically, are we the right people?
You see, that's part of the issue, because I was about to say to you, it's critical to have the right management, the right people in management. And it's critical to have the right people at board level. But that's not the end. You've got to have the executive that is prepared to do what is required to be done to get things right. You've got to have Parliament, which has a constitutional obligation of oversight that will make sure that it exercises its oversight obligations properly. And we, in due course, one will have to look at, has it exercised that obligation properly over the past number of years? If it did, why are we where we are? What about the political heads, political leaders of these SOEs over the years? Have they done their job properly? Where did things really go wrong? What do we need to do to make sure that we never get back to this situation? And we can't get to that without knowing where we went wrong. But thank you, Mr. Mxakwe.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. And then you mentioned that over the past 10 years, the SABC had managed to make profit in those 3 years that you mentioned, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. But then the very next paragraph, you say that is misleading. How is that misleading?
So if I may explain, in the past 10 years, the SABC has not been profitable. The only years, it's 2011, 12, and 2013, 14, where there was a certain level of profitability. And the only reason this was the case is because there was low investment in content. You will also note that in 2016 and 17, where we registered huge losses, this was at the time where there was the high investment in content. So that's the explanation for those 2 paragraphs.
All right, okay. And then in paragraph 13, you deal with the amortization of content at 1.95 billion. Could you just explain to the Chair that whole concept that you deal with? You deal with it at length in your supplementary statement.
Right.
We might just deal with it now in full, the whole issue, because you've got quite a number of paragraphs dealing with that. You can put it in. Yeah.
So, Chairperson, like in any other business, the business of broadcasting is about content, and there is a need to invest in content. For us to also see the return on investments, as the Chairperson was saying yesterday, you need to invest between 18 to 24 months. And it's critical because the content drives audience, and audience is very linked to generation of revenue. So if you're not investing as much as you're doing when it comes to content, as we are now, we're doing a lot of repeats in some of our programs. And what it does is it affects our ability to attract revenue, because advertisers and clients then say, but why should I invest on a content that is not compelling, that is not relevant, that is not fresh? So in 2016-17, the year where we made huge losses was the year in which there was huge investment in content, and 11 to 14, those are the years where we did not invest much in content, and it showed better profitability as a result.
Thank you. And then the chairperson yesterday did mention the figures that you deal with in paragraph 14 that deal with the losses over the 2014-15 years, 2018-2019. Do you confirm that paragraph? It's exactly, and the improvement of 33%. He testified to all of that yesterday.
Yes, indeed. If you look at the losses that have been registered in the past 3 years, you moved, in the past 3 fiscals, you moved from over 1 billion straight to 644 million, and the previous one is at 483, and that's still unaudited, but it does indicate a 33% improvement in terms of driving down losses. And this is also in line with the strategy that we've implemented when it comes to organization-wide cutting measures when it comes to costs. But I also need to mention, because there has been a narrative that the SABC had money that was left. In the past 3 years, if you look at cash balance as at every end of each year, we had 131 million, we had 82 million, and then we had 131, and the past fiscal we have 72 million. So these past 3 years, that is what we had as at the end of the fiscal.
Yes. Thank you. And then the chairperson of the board also dealt with the employee costs and currently sitting at 45%, is that?
Correct, it's just over 45%. And I think this is another issue that concerns us as executives, because when you're asked to turn around an institution, the first thing you need to look into, in fact, there are 3 things. You look at revenue generation. What additional income can you ensure you bring in, as well as additional revenue streams? The second point, you look at where can you cut costs. Currently, the SABC is at over 45% when it comes to costs. The second highest line when it comes to costs is the signal distribution. That accounts for about 12% of our total expenditure. And it's sitting just over 1.1 billion. Indeed, we need the signal distribution, but the issue is with all the technology that we have now, surely we can do better. So when we walked in as executives last year, that's what the board said to us. Look at a way where we can ensure you reset basic business fundamentals. And that includes looking at all of the cost items, but also looking at revenue generation streams. This is why, Chairperson, if I may also indicate, in a very difficult financial year, the team has been able to deliver a 6.5 billion revenue, despite all of advertisers withdrawing when it comes to budgets. Because in any economic recession, the first budgets that get cut would be communication, marketing, and advertising. But despite that, we have been able to drive this. So it is a worry that we still have employee costs that are at over 45%. And it's something that needs to be looked into.
Yes. And the chairperson of the board also dealt yesterday with the exorbitant sports rights costs. You also deal extensively with that in your supplementary affidavit. Could you just explain to the chair and then just deal with your submissions to ICASA that relate to this matter, and I will take you through some of the legislation that's relevant as you do so. Thank you.
Chairperson, we have a very interesting situation. Our mandate expects us to broadcast sports of national interest. And the biggest issue with that is that it is an unfunded mandate. Essentially, it means that we need to cross-subsidize the mandate using the commercial revenue that we make every single year. To give you a sense, in the past 5 years, we've spent about 3.8 billion on the costs of sports rights. And the problem with costs of sports rights is that it's the rights holders that decide on the price. That's the first point. And of the 3.8 billion that we've spent, the only revenue and income we've made is 150 million. So you can imagine you put in 3.8 billion and all you're getting is a mere 150 million. And this is in line with what we have then decided as part of our strategy. Any deal that is not commercially viable for the SAPC, we will never sign. And this is not just isolated in terms of what we're doing on sports rights. Even when it comes to production, the production of our content on TV has been hugely disappointing in the sense that we have had to pay millions, hundreds of millions. But if you look at the returns on investments, it does not warrant that. So the decision we took, every single contract we get into, notwithstanding our commitment to the public mandate, it has to make sense for the SAPC. So it's a similar thing that is happening in sports. We have decided that going forward, any deal, even when it comes to sports rights, certainly we committed to our mandate, but our mandate does not say the SAPC should get into deals that are not commercially viable.
One question, taking you back to the previous question or the evidence about staff salaries taking 45% of your budget. Is there a percentage in terms of staff salaries that generally is accepted to say, well, if you are running a business, your staff salaries shouldn't be above a certain percentage? Is there anything like that? And if there is, how does 45% compare to what is accepted as a norm?
It depends on sectors. Where I come from in the private sector, you would look at least at nothing more than 25, 28%.
Yes.
Other very aggressive company may say it should be less than 20%.
Yes.
So it will really depend on which sector, but where we are as an organization,
yes,
it is, I mean, just to give you a sense of the 6.5 billion in revenue last year, last fiscal, it means that we're going to have to pay just over 3 billion towards salaries.
Yes.
And that's not sustainable. And I think, to Chair's point, this is one of the tough decisions that I think we need to look into.
Yes, yes, yes. And then with regard to the question of sports rights and so on, you must have looked at what other public broadcasters in other nations do. Do they find themselves in this situation where the stakeholders basically tell you what you are going to have to pay them for these sports rights? Is there any, I'm sure there is a comparison that has been done somewhere, but you might or might not be able to speak to it.
What we've said, Chairperson, is that for years, SABC has been paying for a property that it does not even know its value. As the SABC, our stance has been very clear. Whenever we engage with our partners when it comes to these commercial deals, let's first do a proper valuation of the property so that we can look at pricing, we can look at commercial viability, and as well as how we're going to be able to sell this. Because for every single content that we get, it's important that we have a sales pipeline for the next 9 months to say, we need to approach our clients, and this is the forecast that we need to do going forward. So it's different in other places. I think we have allowed a situation where we engage in deals that do not make any commercial sense for the SABC.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And then in the same paragraph, you deal with national sporting events of public interest, and you make reference to Government Gazette number 7 of 2010. Chair, may I refer the witness to Exhibit 26, which is the legislation bundle.
I'm sorry, to
Exhibit CC 26.
Exhibit CC
26.
26, okay.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. And then it will be under divider marked 2. Have you found it, Mr. Mxakwe?
Yes, I have.
Yes, thank you. This is the Sport Broadcasting Services Regulations of 2010. And I would like to take you to page 40, marked on the right-hand corner in red. And I was looking at the list of all these sports that are regarded as sports of national interest, and I don't see netball there. Or am I missing something?
Yeah, it's not there, I don't know,
It's not there.
because we have it.
So it's really not regarded as a matter of public interest. but
Gender discrimination.
serious gender discrimination, Chair. And at the end of the commission, we'll make submissions on that. Thank you. So these matters that are listed here, these are the matters that you refer to in that paragraph.
Correct.
And what is expected of you as the SABC insofar as these events are concerned?
There's an expectation for us to broadcast sports of national interest. The biggest issue with this, Chairperson, is that much as there is an expectation in law, the biggest issue is when it comes to the financial imperative. I'll give you a sense. We did a projection. In the next 3 years, the public mandate, unfunded public mandate, is going to cost SABC 6.8 billion. So essentially, we are expected to broadcast all of this without any financial support. That's one. But the second point is that we also get to a stage where we ask ourselves, these unfunded mandates, if they are so critical, why is it then that there is no portion of funding allocated in order to help us? I've said earlier on, Chairperson, we're fully committed to fulfilling our mandate, but there needs to be a reasonable expectation of what can be done.
Thank you.
Now, the expectation you talk about, is it the expectation from the national executive? Is it, are you talking about the expectation from the public, or is it both?
It's actually the regulations stipulated.
It's in the regulations.
Correct.
Okay, okay. Actually, I guess if it is in the regulations, it probably is more than an expectation. Is it not an obligation?
But it also
I don't know, I haven't looked at the actual wording.
Yes. Indeed, it is an obligation, but it also says free to air.
Yes.
It says free to air, and you must also appreciate, Chairperson, the SABC is not the only free to air.
Yes.
And the regulations do not even specifically mention the SABC.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And then in paragraph 18, you deal with you've mentioned signal and linkages.
Sorry, where
I
are we?
beg your pardon.
You are back to
I beg your pardon, Chair. Yes, I'm back to your statement. I beg your pardon. Okay. The big file, okay. Exhibit 5. Okay.
Yes, I'm
Thank
back.
you. Oh, sorry. Paragraph 18.
Yes.
Then you deal there with linkages and those signal costs and broadcast costs. But there is something that I'd like to just talk to you about, which one of the witnesses is going to deal with, who dealt with the TNA agreement. I see you mention in that paragraph that there are other ad hoc costs incurred by the corporation, such as satellite feeds and telephone lines used during outside broadcasts. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a typical example would be the breakfast shows that SABC was hosting, because one witness says, well, TNA was not going to charge the SABC anything for doing that, but the SAB had to follow with all of its equipment, its staff, wherever there's going to be a live broadcast. So can you just explain to Chair how then these costs come about? Because then they would prepare us for that witness that is going to deal with the TNA matters.
Okay. So as I had said earlier on, Chairperson, the second biggest cost line item in our P&L is the signal distribution. As you may know, we operate 19 radio stations, At any given week, we reach close to 28 million people. And then also we have TV stations where every single month we reach close to 29 million people. Now, I think it better explains why the SABC is such a contested terrain. The issue with the signal distribution is that we have a responsibility to ensure that in every single place where we are, the transmission of our signal through the public is done. And this is costing us about 1.1 billion every single year, and is the second biggest contributor in terms of our, and Centec is obviously our signal distribution partner that we have not been able to pay in the past couple of 6 months, purely because of the situation that we're in. The issue that you are mentioning on outside broadcasts, I'll make an example. If there's a government department that has a particular project that they want to run in some far-flung rural area, what we'd normally do is we'd actually send one of our trucks to that place. So all of those outside broadcast as well as satellite feeds, that's basically what it's referring to.
Okay. So you would incur those costs. So
Correct.
even if an entity comes to the SABC and say, I'm offering this service, I'm not going to charge you for it, but when you look at these costs, then it becomes quite expensive for you to run.
We charge those entities. When any government department or any organization approaches us for a particular event, we do charge. But the biggest issue is that from a distribution point of view, the outside broadcasts are quite expensive.
Okay, thank you. And then you gave us the figures, the percentages on signal distribution, and you also, are you benchmarking it with the international one?
Correct. In
Yes.
terms of the cost of signal distribution internationally, it's at 7%, and we are at 12% as the SABC. And it's one of the things that we're looking into.
Yes. And
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Chair.
Have you been able to establish the reason for the discrepancy or not yet? Why you are at 12, whereas the international average is 7%? From a policy point of view, Chairperson, there is a need for the SABC to have a mix of both DTT as well as DTH. And we believe that if we can have that healthy mix, we would be able to deal with some of the costs that are quite high from a signal distribution point of view. Okay.
yes, thank you. In paragraph 19, you deal with some of the commercial deals which you believe that they were unsound, financially unsound. Can you just deal with that and why you think that those deals are not good for the SABC?
Well, all of those deals on paragraph 19, they've been investigated by the SIU. The biggest issue there was that there were a lot of maladministration when it came to these deals. Either there was no contract in place and there were payments made, or there was an issue of deviations that was deliberate to accommodate certain of these. And it was just really the typical malfeasance. It's an indication of what happened at the SABC in the past. All of those deals that are shown there.
Yes, and then you tabulate them in Annexure B to your statement. Chair, may I refer the Chair to page 18? Your Annexure B, and at page 21, you have actually listed those companies.
18.
20, if you go to 21, that's where 18. That's where your annexure starts. But
Oh, yes.
I would like to refer you to paragraph 20, to page 21.
Correct.
So you say these matters have been referred to the relevant prosecuting authorities,
Yes.
and you've mentioned there, you've listed them, names of the directors, various companies listed in there.
Correct.
And you've tabulated even those that were referred for disciplinaries at page 23. Okay. I see those that have been
There are
referred.
so many.
There are so many, yes. I see those that have been referred for prosecutions, you're looking at about 5. There's individuals and
Yes.
companies there. And then those that have been referred for disciplinaries, you have a lot of those. They go right up to page, up to page 24. I'm so sorry, item 24, page 26.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct. All of those, you will see, Chairperson, for every deal that was corrupt, there is a corresponding individual. So all of these individuals that are mentioned there, those are SABC employees. Most of them, they are no longer in the employ of the SABC.
Yes. Sorry, the chair had asked you a question about salary range and benchmarking of salaries. Can I just take you back to, on that point, page 17, which is the estimated employee compensation. Are you there?
Yes, I'm
Although
there.
it doesn't reflect individual salaries, but how does one assess those figures? When you say directors and GEs, are those their annual or gross salaries? How does one look at those figures?
My understanding of the chair's question was, we said that the percentage of the SABC vis-à-vis expenditure on employee compensation
Yes.
is over 45%. So my understanding was, how does it compare to other organizations that are in a good financial health?
Oh, you're quite
So-
correct.
So this one, it basically shows internally the different levels and how much each of those cost the company.
Yes. And then the bargaining unit, will that be your labor department?
Correct.
Okay.
So the directors and the group executives, it would include the non-executives, the fees paid to the board. It would also include the 3 executive directors, as well as group executives that are members of EXCO. So that is the total cost to company,
Okay.
what you see there.
What does it mean, the item non-guaranteed for permanent, what does that mean?
Sorry, where is that?
It's just below guaranteed compensation for permanent positions, and then you've got non-guaranteed for permanent.
Oh, non-guaranteed for permanent. That effectively means, one of the things we are doing, Chairperson, if I may explain, we're running an organization where you have about 300 managers acting in different positions.
Acting.
Correct. We have about 300.
300.
Yes. We have reduced that number significantly. We're now standing at 227. But it does give you a sense of the organization you're running, because if you have acting managers and they need to we do it for a 3-month period. You also have people who've been acting for close to 7, 8, sometimes 9 years at the SABC. And it makes decision-making difficult, the sense of taking responsibility. So to your question, the 280 would then refer to the amount, for example, that we need to pay for acting positions. It's costing us currently about 2 million every single month for all of the people that are acting in those managerial positions.
Is that in terms of acting allowances?
Correct.
Okay, yeah. Because otherwise, if you were not paying acting allowances and were, for example, just paying them what a permanent incumbent in that position would be getting, then it wouldn't make much
Correct.
difference, yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
But
Chair.
of course, maybe an acting allowance will mean that employees or that manager's normal salary in his or her original position plus the acting allowance
Correct.
still keeps them lower than the rate at which a permanent incumbent would have been
Would
paid.
have been, yes.
So from that point of view, it's better that way.
But the issue, Chairperson, is when it comes to stability, because one of the
Yes.
things we want to do
Yeah.
is to stabilize the
Obviously.
SABC.
Yeah.
And it does not give room
Yeah.
to do that,
Yes.
particularly if you have so many. I mean,
Yes.
permanent, we have about 3,000 permanent employees. And if you have close to 300 of those acting, it does create a lot of instability
Yes.
from a decision-making point of view,
unacceptable.
operational execution, and all of the things that we should be doing to take the organization forward.
No, it is unacceptable that's about what, 10% of
Correct.
employees, and I guess if you look at the management structure, it's much more than, it's a higher percentage of
Yes.
management who are in acting positions.
Correct.
So I'm sure then, given your high wage bill cost, it's difficult to fill those positions, and the situation that you find yourselves in, not having
Yeah.
money.
Correct.
So, thank you.
But, well, I'm not sure whether one can say the financial challenges are a justification or an excuse for not filling those positions when you are paying acting allowances. In other words, isn't the problem somebody failing to make a judgment call to say, is it sustainable to have somebody or so many managers acting for a year, 2 years? You have mentioned some instances of 7 years, 9 years. I mean, you can't be saying, well, we can't fill this position because there is no money, and yet you are paying a lot of money over a long period.
Indeed, Chairperson, this is an issue that we're dealing with. In the past couple of months, we've been able to advertise critical vacancies, particularly those that we know are quite key to the running of the business, whether you're talking about the need to get highly skilled people within the sales division. We have had a lot of radio station managers that were acting, and we now have advertised those positions in order to bring the right caliber of talent.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Shall we move on? What's the time? Chair, I'm advised that it's now 11:05. Would Chair want?
We can go up to quarter past. Yeah.
Yes, Chair, please. Thank you. Then, in paragraph 20, this is a matter that deals with the infrastructure and the buildings. Paragraph 2 of your statement. Back to your statement, please. Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
It is at
divider
page, it's
Divider 15.
divider CC 15,
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Chair.
No.
yeah, page 4.
Got it.
Yes. Thank you. And then there you deal with maintenance of your various buildings. The chairperson of the board did indicate yesterday, mentioned the oil spills and the problems that you're having in that regard. So what would you like to highlight in what you're saying in that paragraph, briefly?
I think, Chairperson, this one is very close to my heart because it affects the safety and the health of the employees of the SABC. The truth of the matter, we are not able to invest in the upgrading, maintenance, and refurbishment of our infrastructure. Just a couple of months ago, we had a huge concrete steel in one of our reception areas that just fell and endangering the lives of our employees. You may have seen the diesel spillage. Lots and lots of our employees were hospitalized due to inhaling diesel fumes. Recently, we had a fire incident. You must also appreciate these are old buildings. If you look at our lifts, you know, we should have upgraded or changed them 15 years ago, and we're still using them. And this poses a huge risk, not just to the employees, but also to the organization. You can imagine what it does from a staff morale point of view. If you wake up in the morning, you go to an organization where your safety and healthy is not guaranteed. And I think as the accounting officer, it's something that I do not sleep well at night thinking what may happen. And I'm also not talking just about Auckland Park. It's the same if you go to our buildings in KZN. There's been a historical legacy where all of these buildings were not maintained. And unfortunately, one of the things we had done for the funding that we had applied for, we had earmarked a certain portion of that money to the maintenance and of our buildings across the country. If you go to Limpopo, it's the same thing. You go to Free State, our buildings have not been maintained for many, many, many years.
Thank you. In paragraph 21, we highlight some of the SABC group executive members who were highlighted in, or implicated rather, in wrongdoing, and their names would appear in the Annexure B that I've just taken you to, where the SIU had listed those names and companies. So are those, what I would like to know, are those executive members still serving within the SABC?
Chairperson, when I started this job on the 1st of, I think the board did not disclose this, that almost half of my EXCO members were implicated in wrongdoing, and they were subject of SIU cases. Some of them were implicated in the wrongdoing within the SABC. And I think from the ability of a leader to lead, you need to have a certain moral authority. And I think it was a big issue because you lead an organization that you want to stabilize, strengthen internal controls, but the very people that you want to do this with are actually implicated. So we have had to go through a very rigorous process when it comes to disciplinary hearings with the individual's consent. Some of them left the organization instead of going through the disciplinary process. Some of them are still going through the disciplinary processes. And as I've said earlier on, in all of these matters, we are guided by the recommendations from the SIU, from the public protector, and I do know that there has been a narrative that we are purging people. And the truth of the matter is that it does not matter who you are, even if you are part of EXCO. If there's any wrongdoing that has been identified, it is the right thing for the SABC to act. So some of them are still with us. They've gone through the proper processes, and some of them are on suspension, and some of them have left the organization.
Thank you. You have dealt with the issue of the morale, generally, of the employees, and in paragraph 22 and 23, you deal with the low-level employees having witnessed or having been aware of some of the corrupt deals that the senior managers were involved in. So then, other than the morale, that they're worried that they're not going to get paid, possibly at the end of the month, what other issues relate to the matters that you highlight in paragraphs 22 and 23, insofar as leadership and management are concerned?
I think the biggest issue is the element of trust. There's been a huge issue around trust, and what we've done with the different EXCO members is to every week dedicate time to make sure that we have these cross-functional teams in the organization that we can meet, engage, and talk to, but also to listen to their concerns. People, for example, are concerned about how a lot of people were promoted without any basis from a merit point of view, without the required competency, without the required skills. And it does create a certain issue when it comes to trust, when it comes to pursuing careers within the SABC from that point of view. In fact, it's one of the reasons why we have had to take action against the irregular appointments, because a lot of people that are qualified and competent within the organization, they looked at these colleagues who are actually occupying higher level positions, and yet they are also there with their own skill set as well as their own qualifications, but they were overlooked in the past. So we're trying to normalize the environment, to stabilize it, and to ensure that we instill a sense of belonging to the employees that are there.
Thank you.
How are you dealing with that? Are you firstly talking to the individuals concerned to say, look, for ABCD reasons, it would appear that your appointment or promotion was irregular, and reflect on it. We would like to change the situation. Maybe this is how we would like it to be done. What do you have to say with a view to reversing the promotion, or how is it being handled, generally speaking?
The manner in which it has been handled, because this was also part of the recommendations from the ad hoc committee and the public protector, we did not want to take the law in our hands. Because, Chairperson, you must also remember, SABC has clearly defined policies when it comes to selection and appointment. As an individual professional, you would know if you are being appointed irregular at any given time. The excuse that we've had over the past was, oh no, so-and-so did it. I was appointed, but it takes two. You were not forced to be appointed in a particular role. So our approach has been to approach the court to help us set aside these appointments and declare them invalid. But also the point that you've made, Chairperson, to say, could they go back to their original positions? The problem is that those positions have already been filled. And I think for us it's the matter of justice to ensure that we take this to court and not take the law in our own hands. By the way, we started with 27 employees. What has since happened is we've now been inundated with a lot more people coming forth to say, we know that this, when it comes to this person, processes were not followed. Even in that, we're going to go through the comprehensive process of investigation that we went through with the 27. And we're going to then come back with a phase 2 when it comes to these processes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's now 12:15.
Yes, I think we can take the tea adjournment. We'll resume at 11:30.
Thank you.
Let's adjourn.
All rise.
Okay, let's proceed.
Chairman, Mr. Mxakwe, can you just go back to the question that the chairperson had asked you, because this is something we spoke about over tea, about you not filling the vacancies, that is the SABC, when I say you, not filling the 300 acting positions or appointing people permanently, so to speak. Could you just tell the chairperson the reasons? I had put in the reason to you by saying because you didn't have money, you thought then you wouldn't appoint these people permanently, but what are the reasons for that?
Oh, just switch on the mic.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chairperson. There was a ministerial directive in December saying that the entities should not fill in some of the positions because there was a process of integrating two departments. As a result, we were not able to fill those. That's why we were only able to do this last month when the moratorium was then declared. We could now fill the other positions. So it's not just an issue of money, but the reason was that there was a directive from the ministry that we should not fill in the positions until such time that integration process has taken place. So that has now been partially lifted. That's why we're able to advertise for the 91 positions that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Can we go to page 6 of your statement now? We deal with the Auditor General's report. I would like to take you to some aspects of that report. This is for the 2017-2018 financial year, and that report appears at page 30.
Yes.
Thank you. Here, the Auditor General, it's written, it's entitled Disclaimer of Opinion. My understanding is that the AG would make a disclaimer only when the AG is not given sufficient information in order for him to be able to formulate an opinion about the financial status of any entity. Am I correct?
Partially.
Yes.
So the biggest issue here was the Auditor General raised concerns in terms of the status of going concern for the SABC. They looked at the short-term liabilities vis-a-vis our assets. And I think the biggest issue also there was the cause for concern around reckless trading or trading under insolvent circumstances. So that was the biggest issue that they had. And once again, the idea there was we were hoping at that point that there would have been financial injection because they wanted certainty to say, are you going to be able to proceed as a business in the next 12 months? And owing to the fact that we could not get any confirmation, that was the biggest issue when it comes to going concern.
Yes. And then what is the position now?
The position has...
Because sorry, just ask, because I would imagine, although the AG has flagged that, look, there's a disclaimer of opinion, but he would have gone back to the entity to say that you need to satisfy A, B, C, D, and E, I would imagine.
Correct.
And your management statements or accounts that we would submit to him would also deal with those aspects. I just want to understand, in terms of compliance, what has been done since the time that AG report came to the fore.
I know the CFO is going to talk to this, but we have been able to ensure that all of the statements that are submitted reflect the completeness that was required. But the second point, when it comes to going concern, regrettably, we are actually where we were last year, owing to the fact that there is no capital injection for the SABC. And in the engagements with AG, they've once again raised the concern on this matter.
Thank you. The matters that you raise, you've touched upon them in paragraphs 29 right up to paragraph 32, but then the chairperson had dealt with the reconstitution of the board in 2017, and we don't have to deal with that. But what I would like you to testify to is the strategic roadmap. Is that the same as that strategic turnaround strategy that the chairperson of the board spoke about yesterday?
Correct.
Yes. And you have attached it to your statement?
Yes, I have.
Yes. If I may just direct the chairperson to the relevant page, you will find it, Mr. Chairman, it's at page 38.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And it's SABC Strategic Roadmap.
And I think the chairperson of the board dealt with what he considered were
Critical
key,
matters.
Key features, I think
Yes.
3 of them.
Yes, Chair.
And I don't know whether you
I just want
are
to
going to ask Mr. Mxakwe to identify those that he regards as key himself. Or,
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, yeah. The Chair had identified them yesterday. Could you just, if he has left out any other important aspects of this strategy?
Or if he might
Or-
not agree, he might have a different view.
Maybe
He might have a different view as to
What he regards
which
as
ones are
important.
key features. So
Yes,
you
thank
mustn't
you.
assume that they agree.
Yes, no, I'm fully aligned with Chairperson, but I think,
Yes.
if I may comment, when we joined in July 2018, the board mandated us to develop a strategic roadmap for the SABC, and indeed, we developed this. We engaged with all the key stakeholders, the Department of Communications at the time. We also got inputs from organized labor, and the next point was to ensure that we cascade this throughout the different levels in the organization. And Chairperson spoke about this, but just to reinforce the point, there's a couple of pillars that it's based on. The first one is to accelerate and maximize revenue generation. The second point is to deal with cost-cutting measures across the organization. The third point is to deal with governance issues. And I think what is very key for me, Chairperson, because of this strategy, which, by the way, has clearly outlined turnaround plans, whether you're talking about financial sustainability, what we need to do there, whether you're talking about platforms and content, whether you look at digital, we have a solid digital strategy. HR, we want to ensure that we have a competent workforce that is geared towards, that is fit for purpose. Then in terms of governance, to produce and instill a solid governance framework internally. And the last part is on partnerships. And I think, Chair, I need to hasten, because when people talk about these partnerships, there's this narrative now that SABC needs to strip some of its assets. We will not do that, and for the simple reason. If you look, for example, there's a station called XKFM that serves the Ku and the Kwe people in the Northern Cape. We pump in millions in that station, and from a return on investment, we have nil financially. But in terms of our mandate, which is really to inform all South African people, it's actually key for us. So there has been that. But coming back to this, because of this solid turnaround strategy and plan, the SABC has been able to stay afloat for the past many months, despite not having any form of financial injection. And you can imagine, Chairperson, what then would happen if this strategy that has taken us where we are today could actually be properly recapitalized.
Thank you. The matters that you raise from paragraphs 34 relate to this turnaround strategy, which you've dealt with quite in detail this morning, and the capital injection matters and the forensic reports, right up to paragraph 40, and then paragraph 41. These are matters that the chairperson of the board dealt with, but then the next witness is going to deal with matters relating to editorial interference. If I may then just take you, unless there's something in that, on that page that you want to emphasize, but these are the matters that you've already testified to. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure, all of those matters. But I would like to take you, you've dealt with advertising and how it forms part of the stream for the SABC. There is something that I would like you to deal with, which we dealt with yesterday. Unfortunately, that exhibit, I have not asked the registrar to place before the chairperson. That is CC23A. Mr. Chairman, if it is, but if it is difficult to find, I can leave the questions for maybe after lunch. That is where it has not been placed. Can you just find that it is in that pack, in the bundle there? Yes, it will be a small. That's the media statements that you referred to yesterday. Yes, thank you. CC23, could you just take it?
Will it be written media,
No,
something on the spine?
It's written, Chair, it's these small ones that I handed up yesterday.
Oh.
Exhibit CC23A. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Could Thank you, Chair. Could you please turn to page 6 of that bundle?
Did you say 6?
Page 6, yes, Chair. Thank you. That is an article by the Star, am I correct? The one that,
Yes.
where they're quoting you. Sorry. Page 6. Thank you, I've got it. Thank you. I just want to find out where you were quoted. No, am I? Oh, thank you. This is the issue that we canvassed with the chairperson, where the Star had reported that the SABC board has refused to be drawn on allegations of discontent between the board and the SABC top executives. And the chairperson of the board did touch upon this matter yesterday. Do you want to talk to that briefly to the chairperson as to what sort of interference are some of the members of the board engaged in insofar as the executive roles are concerned?
Chairperson, there are certain members of the board that are making it difficult for us to do our job. I would not want to get into much details, but
Yes.
suffice to say, indeed, there is interference from some board members, particularly when it comes to editorial independence of the SABC. And we've raised this with the board. But even more concerning now is the interference in some of the commercial operational deals that we're dealing with. And we've raised this with the board. And frankly, Chairperson, we've reached a point, as especially the 3 directors and some of the EXCO members, where the manner in which we're supposed to do our job is being stifled by these non-execs. And I do think that, and I know that the chairperson and the board would look into this, because it's really untenable. We cannot continue as executives as long as these issues continue from these members.
Now, when you say that wanting to get involved in the deals, does this mean that having to report to them about the deals that you as management you are involved in, contracts that you are busy with, the tenders that you are going to issue? I just want to understand.
If I may, I would not want Chairperson to
go into
details.
But I just
Yes.
want to confirm that there are board members within the SABC board,
Yes.
making our job difficult.
Yeah.
They interfering when it comes to editorial issues, as well as some of the commercial deals.
Yes. No, I think I can understand your reluctance to go into details given the fact that the board is still seized with the matter. As I understand it, you have raised the matter with the board. So, but I think that it may well be that at some stage in the future, consideration could be given to whether somebody would come back and give the commission more details at a time when the board might have finished its processes and so on. At this stage, I'm not saying it must be done, but I'm saying maybe consideration should be given to that. If at that stage it appears that there might be difficulties, then the commission could be informed and the reasons could be given, and one can consider whether it should be more than simply a suggestion. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Then, if you would permit me, I think most of the matters that run up to paragraph 65, you have dealt with.
Are you back in the statement?
I beg your pardon, Chair. Yes, I'm back in the statement, sorry. Just that I just leave mine opened all the time, so it's easy to just move to it. That is page 13, Chair, 13.
Yes.
The one matter that I would like us to talk about, which the chairperson did touch upon, is the operating model and the structure of the SABC, which you deal with from paragraph 66 onwards, and the rehabilitation and all those. Could you just talk roughly about those matters?
Yes, if I may.
Yes.
I think the biggest issue on this, which for us as executives that it's really concerning, is we inherited an organization that is in a mess. And we are now undergoing a process of rehabilitation and renewal. And would have expected an engagement and willingness to help the SABC. That is still not happening, Chairperson. And I do think that the lack of support from a funding point of view, the issue of interference from some of the board members, they put us as executive directors in a very difficult position in as far as continuing in these roles. Because frankly, we feel that we are in the way of the bailout, and I don't think it's fair for the SABC. So you can talk about all of the things that we have done in a fair and just world. If you look at the achievements that we've been able to accomplish in the past 12 months, it should be a no-brainer for anyone to want to do capital injection in the SABC.
Thank you.
Are you able to, when you analyze the situation, are you able to identify what the reason is for this situation where you have not been given the funding? Or is that something that you'd prefer not to deal with at this stage?
All I can say, Chairperson, is that as the executive team, as employees of the SABC, we've done everything and anything humanly possible to take the SABC where it is now. We therefore do not understand justifiably why we would not get the support that is required.
And you have not been told why?
Well, we have been told that we need to meet preconditions, which we have.
Which you have met?
We have met those preconditions, but besides, without any capital injection, we have been able to ensure that the SABC stays afloat this far.
sometimes in these situations, the problem could be lack of political will. Sometimes it might be lack of appreciation of the urgency of a situation. But it's quite clear from your evidence and the evidence of the chairperson that the matter is urgent and needs to be attended to urgently. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Maybe whilst the chair is on that point, maybe we should just jump to your supplementary statement, because you deal with the issue and you attach the conditions that have been placed before the SABC for it to fulfill. Chair, may I direct the chairperson to page 105? That is an annex.
I'm sorry, before that,
Yes.
and maybe I should have asked this to the chairperson. I'm wondering whether the board has, and the chairperson will forgive me if I did ask him and he did respond and I have forgotten, whether the board has said to the shareholder or to the Minister of Finance, why are we not being given funding in the light of the compliance that is there for everybody to see with the conditions that were given to us? And if so, is there an answer that has been given, or is there silence? I'm saying, I don't know if I did ask the chairperson anything along those lines, but you may or may not be able to say.
I think that question is above my pay grade.
Okay,
But what
all
I
right.
do know is that there was a response that the board sent to both ministers, Chairperson.
Yeah, I guess that's the one where the chairperson said
Yes.
maybe the two ministers were not given the correct information about compliance. Yes. As far as you recall, how long ago was that?
This letter was written last week on Friday.
Oh, okay. So there might not
Yes.
have been enough time since then
Correct.
for reaction. Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. May I take the witness to page 105? This is the letter that the chairperson referred to yesterday, but said you will deal with the details. It was addressed to the chairperson from both ministries, that is the Ministry of Communications and the Ministry of Finance. If you have a look at page 109, both ministers signed the letter on the 27th of August 2019. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And then this is the letter that seems to deal with each of the conditions that were put on the table for the SABC to comply with.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for the record, could you just highlight these conditions to the chairperson? But before you do that, maybe it's important because there's something definite that the ministers say, it sounds quite definite, that they say in the body of the letter. If you could read paragraph 3 of that letter, it is brought, it starts with it is brought at page 105. Are you there?
I'm not sure if this would be proper, Chairperson, because this was from my chairperson to the political heads. Would it be proper for me to go through this?
Well, if it is placed here, and I'm sure your chairperson knows it is here, it would be fine.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
it would
the
be
chairperson
fine.
is present, Chair. We could just swap places if he doesn't want to talk.
No, I don't think it's
Oh,
really
is it-
necessary,
is
because
it-
all you would be doing is reading what the
Okay.
letter
What is
says.
contained,
You know,
yes.
it's not like what you are saying. You know, yeah.
Yes, paragraph 3, it begins with, it is brought,
What page?
page 105.
105, okay. Yes, I'm there.
And paragraph 3 of the letter, the
It says it is-
paragraphs are not numbered, but it is paragraph 3.
Yes, thank you.
It is brought to the attention of the SABC that the National Treasury will not release any part of the 3.2 billion earmarked funding allocation for the SABC until the two departments are satisfied that the public broadcaster has fully complied or demonstrated a commitment to complying with all of the previous conditions to the funding. The 3.2 billion funding will be released in tranches as and when the SABC produces satisfactory evidence in response to the preconditions.
And this is where both you and the chairperson of the board are certainly in agreement that the position is that either all the conditions have been complied with or there's been a substantial compliance with most of the conditions.
Correct.
And therefore, to the extent that one of the, you either must show compliance or demonstrate a commitment to comply with all preconditions, you say, both you and the chairperson say, clearly, you have demonstrated, SABC has demonstrated a commitment, but you say actually you have complied, if not with all, with substantial portion of them.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. I would like you to just place
But
all...
I'm sorry,
Sorry, Chair.
but maybe to be fair on those who may be responsible for giving the funding, insofar as they may only have had for the first time that SAB has complied or substantially complied, that would only have been last week. And therefore there hasn't been a lot of time for them, for SABC to see whether they are acting or not. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I'm not sure now if you, are you prepared to place all the preconditions on record, or would you rather leave that for the chairperson to deal with?
I can do it.
Yes, just reading the headings of all the preconditions so that they are on record.
Well, I don't know if we need to go through them because they are
here,
in the letter.
Chair. Yes, thank you.
And I think at this stage we don't
clear.
understand there to be any dispute.
No, true,
And
Chair.
they are not saying there is any difficulty with complying with all
Yes.
of them.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Maybe we can just say confirm on record that
Yes.
the conditions are in this letter.
Yes, thank you. Do you confirm that these are the conditions that were placed before the SABC?
Yes, they are.
And that your responses to the conditions on compliance, they appear from page 112 right up to page 119, if I'm correct. Sorry, Chair. 122.
Yes.
And then the attachments that go with that right up to the last page of your statement, of your
Correct.
annexures. That will go up to page 130.
Yes.
So that is all the responses that we had furnished to the ministers.
Correct.
Thank you.
With regard to the conditions, only if there is something that you particularly want to draw my attention to, if there is such, you can mention, but otherwise, as long as we know where they are, that should be enough, because you are not saying we have difficulties with condition A, B, C, D. You say we have complied with most, if not all. But if there are some that you want to draw to my special attention, that you may do so.
Yes, Chair, if I may, on page 110, the third paragraph there.
Yes, do you want to read it?
Yes, it says, it is our understanding that we have either complied or substantially complied with each precondition, which has been demonstrated by the substantive documentation supplied over a period of 8 months. We have attached to this letter details on the SABC's compliance with each condition.
Yes. You may be wanting to, do you want to complete a certain point you want to make out of that, or you just wanted to read that?
Indeed. I just wanted to emphasize, Chairperson, that we have demonstrated with all of the attachments how we've been able to comply or
Yes.
substantially complied with each of these conditions.
Yes. No, that's fine. But another point which arises for me out of this paragraph you have read is the reference to 8 months. So I said a few minutes ago, to the extent that the two ministers might only have had for the first time last week that you have complied with all the preconditions, or you have complied substantially, there might not have been enough time for them to make the necessary decisions. But there's this reference to 8 months, and the question that arises is whether this amounts to saying there have been 8 months in which we have complied with all or substantially, and therefore they ought to have known we had complied, and the letter of last week was simply stating something that they should have known for the past 8 months anyway. Or is the position that, look, they might not have known that there has been compliance, or they might have known that there has been some compliance, but they might not have known the level of compliance until last week when the letter was sent. I think it's that clarification which I would like, if possible.
That 8 months, Chairperson, refers to the time when we submitted all of the documentation that was required for the funding. And we then have had to fine-tune some of our submissions throughout these past 8 months and working very closely with GTAC. So it refers to the period when this the
Compliance
correct
was in place.
correct.
Yeah. So, so therefore, it would be fair to say there has been more than enough time for decisions to be taken if what prevented certain decisions from being taken previously was to allow you an opportunity to comply with the conditions.
Correct.
Yes. And you don't know the reason why the decisions haven't been made.
Not at all, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I think that was an important clarification.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Then I think that is all then in the main statement. I think you've covered all the important aspects in your main statement. Could we then move to page 49, which contains your supplementary, and bearing in mind that we've just covered the issue about the funding now. Yes. Page 49, you have already testified to the correction that you wanted to make in paragraph 3 about the cash balances during those financial years.
Correct.
You did testify to that, am I correct?
Yes, I did.
Yes, thank you. And then if you've dealt with the amortization of content, which appears at page 50. And then you have what I would like us to just go back to, although you touched upon it slightly, but I would like you to explain what you explain at page 53, paragraph 17, from paragraph 17 onwards, about the PSL rights acquisition, because it's an important matter that affects the public, and the public need to know how this all works. And
I'm sorry, what page are you?
Page 53, Chair?
Okay.
Yes.
Is what he has to say there any different from what both he and the chairperson have told us about the sports rights?
He
Or
has
is
not.
there something specific?
Something specific about
Okay.
sub-licensing, Chair, which
Okay.
they have not
All right.
touched upon. Yes, could you please just explain briefly what you state in paragraph 17 right up to 21?
Basically, we're saying that we used to, SABC it had an exclusive agreement at the time in terms of the PSL matches. However, we have then had to sub-license this from Super Sports. I'm not sure if you want me to get into the details, but suffice to say, the deal that we have now signed with Super Sports in terms of PSL matches, it does meet the mandate in terms of broadcasting most of the key matches. But underlying that is which is very critical for us, is that it's commercially viable for the SABC. We have had to move away from a historic contract that resulted into a lot of losses, into one that allows us to fulfill our mandate, but in a manner that even those losses compared to the previous ones are the ones that we can be able to manage.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think he needs to go into details.
No, Chair.
Yes.
No, I'm satisfied.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One
And then
second.
we'll-
One second.
I beg your Chair.
Can you ask the referent to put on the echo? Okay. Yes,
Thank
continue.
you, Chair. Can we then jump, because most of the matters you've covered, just your key submissions to the SABC, of the SABC to ICASA. Just highlight those topics that you wanted ICASA to deal with when it's reviewing its regulations. You've dealt largely with the must carry concepts. Just because these that you have suggested to ICASA, I would believe, are relevant now, you would like the Chair to take note of what is it that you propose going forward, am I right?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Could you then start from page 58? You've highlighted those key submissions which you made to ICASA,
Well,
just on the topics, yes.
The first one, Chair, is the issue of competition. We feel that there's a need for a proper valuation of these sports rights to ensure that what we're paying is fair, but there also is a need for transparency, because the SABC then gets locked into these long contracts that are not necessarily commercially viable. That's the first part. And the second part that we've submitted to ICASA is the unbundling of sports rights. This is quite key because for us, we feel that the right holders currently, they can do as they wish. There needs to be a regulation that will help us to deal with some of these. So all of these that you see from page 58,
Yes.
right, these are submissions because ICASA requested all the key players to submit submissions in terms of the sports rights regulations.
Yes. And recently you testified on behalf of the SABC before ICASA?
Correct.
Yes, that was around May 2019.
Yes.
And you made these submissions to ICASA?
Yes, I did.
Yes, and that there's an annexure which would have formed part of your submissions that appears at page 98. Those are some of the submissions that you made to ICASA when you testified before it.
Yes, correct.
Is that correct? Yes, thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to mention to Chair? Because I think we've reached the end of your two statements now.
Yes, certainly. Chair,
Yes.
just to thank you for the opportunity to share what we found and what we're doing in the past 12 months. But I also need to state that we're at a point where, as a leader, you can only inspire and give hope to a certain level. But I'm reaching a point now where every single week I actually have to ask key members of my team not to resign, precisely because of the precarious situation we find ourselves in. And I also cannot really give hope to the 5,000 employees of the SABC who keep every single day thinking something better is going to happen. I said to you earlier on, Chair, I feel, and that's how the three executives feel, and by the way, that's one of the reasons why we lost a key member of the executive team, the acting COO, is we feel as the team we are standing in the way of this bailout. And I do not know what will happen after this, but the truth of the matter is that we cannot continue the way things are. In the interest of the SAPC, certain tough decisions need to be taken.
No, what you have said is very important and is concerning. I don't know whether this is what you mean, but it may well be that what you mean is that the three executives feel that they are not wanted.
Yes.
That's what you mean.
Yes, that's what I mean.
And that is extremely concerning. I might not know the whole story about the SAPC. I'm still going to hear a lot. But I certainly did see yesterday documents that showed improvements that have been happening in terms of losses over the past 3 years that the chairperson said, and I think you confirmed the improvements that happened because of the implementation of the turnaround strategy that the executive and the board have come up with. I guess that maybe the best that one can say is that this is quite a serious situation, and something quite drastic needs to be done to try and make sure that the right decisions are made which would be in the interest of the institution. I can just say at this stage it's quite concerning, and I'm not sure exactly what, if anything, the Commission can do, but I hope that the right people will become aware of this, the evidence you have given, and this part of it in particular, and what the chairperson of the board said yesterday, and will also take note that I think it's something that is quite concerning and that needs some intervention. But I think as many people as possible must be encouraged to stand when they believe they are doing right. Sometimes it can be difficult. The situation can be quite difficult, and sometimes it might be easy for somebody who is not in that person's shoes to say, don't do this, do that, and so on. But thank you for sharing that part with me. It's quite concerning, and I'm hoping that the right intervention is going to happen soon. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to share with the Commission what you know in terms of the SAPC since you joined, and what the executive team and the board have put in place to try and act in the best interests of the SAPC. Thank you very much. You are excused.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, may I ask that the Chair places away that bundle, CC5 to 16, and I would like to call the next witness, Ms. Magopeni. Her statement appears in Exhibit 16, CC17 to 18. That should be on next to the Chair.
Do you want me to take a 5-minute adjournment
Yes, Chair.
while you
Yes,
put
please.
everything
Thank you, Chair.
together?
I'll appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute
Thank you, Chair.
adjournment. We adjourn.
All rise.
Are you ready?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chairman, in respect of this witness, Rule 3 notices were issued to 4 persons that were implicated, being Mr. Matthews, Mr. Mutsuneng, Ms. Faith Mutambi, and Mr. Simon Tebele. And they were issued on time. Mr. Matthews has responded, but he has responded largely to some of the witnesses,
Okay.
not to the evidence of this witness. Chair, we now wish to call Ms. Phathiswa Magopeni. Could she be sworn in?
Yes, please administer the oath or affirmation.
Thank you.
Please state your full name for the record.
Phathiswa Magopeni.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes, I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Magopeni, is it correct that you the head of news for the SABC?
That's correct.
Yes. Is it also correct that you are the first female to head news at the SABC?
Apparently, yes.
Apparently? Yes.
It's correct.
Could you just raise your voice a bit? Or maybe
Okay,
just
I
pull
will.
the mic closer?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, well, she may have to raise the voice too. I'm struggling to hear.
To hear.
Please do raise the voice as well.
Thank
Yes.
you, I'll do so.
Yes, thank
We had a witness, was it last week or
Yes, Chair.
was it this week, who tried to raise his voice, but in the end I gave up. I think his voice was just very soft by
Yeah.
nature. Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Could you just place, or before you place your qualifications on record, let's just quickly identify the statement that has been opened before you, that is contained in Exhibit CC 17 to 18. Chair, the witness's statement, I had asked the registrar to place it before you. It's CC 18. It starts from page 1 up to page 15. Could you please identify?
Yes, that's under divider
18.
CC 18.
That is correct, Chair.
Yeah.
Yes. Have you got it, Ms. Makopeni?
Yes, I've got it.
Thank you. Could you please turn to page 15 of that statement? Is that, 14 rather, is that your signature that appears on that page?
Correct, it's my signature.
Yes, and this was commissioned on the 12th of August 2019?
Correct.
Yes. Are the contents of this statement true and correct?
Correct.
Yes. And did you make this or depose to this affidavit voluntarily?
Yes, voluntarily.
Yes, thank you. Now, let's go back then. We'll start from page 1 of your statement, but before we do that, could you please just place your qualifications before the chairperson?
I matriculated in Zwelithini. I have a
Are you
bachelor.
starting there because of what the chairperson
Yes.
said previously?
Yes, yes.
Well, you see, you have to be careful because doing it that way might make people think that you are not as young.
All right.
Yes.
So I have a matric that I got in 1989 in Zwelithini. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree from UWC, or University of the Western Cape. I have a Bachelor of Honors Bachelor of Arts Honors from the same university, University of the Western Cape. I have an Integrated Marketing Communications Diploma from the AAA School of Advertising. I have a Business Studies Postgraduate Diploma from the Gordon Institute of Business Science, University of Pretoria. I have a Master of Philosophy degree from the University of the Western Cape and a Master of Business Administration degree from GIBS, University of Pretoria.
Well, that's the way I'm used to.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. You're heading one of the most important components of what the SAB really is all about, heading the newsroom.
Yes,
Could you
that's
just tell the
correct.
chairperson what you deal with? Oh, sorry, before I do that, when did you join the SABC?
I joined the SABC on the 1st of March 2018.
Yes. And before you joined the SABC, where were you working?
I was with ENCA. When I left, I was the head of terrestrial news services and the business and economics editor.
Yes. And before you went to ENCA, did you work for any other news channel?
Yes, I was at SABC before. It was for 2 years. I left just as ENCA was launching its 24-hour channel. And prior that, I was a lecturer at the University of the Western Cape and University of Cape Town.
Yes. And when, for the first time, did you work for the SABC? The first time that you worked and left? When was that?
It was 2006-07, and then I left in 2008.
Yes. And then you rejoined in 2018?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And then you first deal in your statement with the culture as you found it upon your appointment. Could you just tell the chairperson about what you found in the newsroom and what you deal with in those paragraphs?
The first
I'm
thing
sorry,
that-
just to clarification. Your position is head of news, is that right?
Yes, I also have executive responsibilities as group executive
Yes.
in the
Yeah,
corporation.
what I wanted to find out is whether head of news is head of both radio and TV news, or
It's TV, radio, and digital platforms.
all
Yes,
of them?
all of them, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you may
Thank you, Chair.
proceed.
Maybe just to get the structure, as head of news, who reports to you?
It's the general manager for television news, general manager for radio news, general manager for strategic planning for the division, and there's another general manager for special projects.
Yes.
Those are the 4 people who report directly to me.
Okay, thank you. And then what is your role then as head of news?
My role is to provide leadership oversight in terms of strategy, in terms of operations, and in terms of editorial responsibilities.
Yes. So then let's go back to what you then found, and then you will tell the chairperson about what you found and how easy it was or difficult it was for you then to implement the mandate that you believe you have in terms of your obligations as head of news.
Okay.
Yes.
It's just starting with the functions within the division itself. It provides news content to 19 radio stations and 3 free-to-air television channels, SABC 1, 2, and 3, and the dedicated channel, which is our 24-hour news channel, SABC News Channel, and our digital platforms. So that's the service that we provide across all the platforms as the news division. And in addition to that, we have what has been referred to here before, the radio station in the Northern Cape, XKFM, which serves the 2 communities there, and the languages that we serve, it's Tlontali and Kwedam. So we provide news content there and current affairs.
Yes.
So as part of the work that we do, getting into that environment, I found decay.
You found?
Decay, decay, a serious state of decay in the newsroom. The newsroom was subdued. But you could sense that the kind of equilibrium that companies would be hoping for is not the kind of equilibrium that I found there. It was something else. There was something bubbling underneath, even though it looked like things were normal. The newsroom was on autopilot, even though there were managers in the system who were supposed to take responsibility in terms of giving directions. And the nature of the leadership that existed did not assist the organization to do what it was meant to do. And it is often said that any contribution by managers that does not assist to impact the capacity of the organization to deliver, to achieve its results and to attain its objectives, it's not supposed to be there. But that's exactly what existed in that environment. And this is not a failure of human resource processes, it's a failure of leadership. the fact that it was allowed to happen. So this is the environment that I found. And also the fact that you had people who were leading or were supposed to lead the newsroom who were not trusted by journalists within the newsroom was the problem. Those people had no legitimacy, and they did not command any authority to be respected by the journalists within the newsroom because they were associated with a period where things happened that were not supposed to be happening in a newsroom, with the serious editorial drifts that happened during that period.
So the lack of trust by the journalists in that leadership wasn't necessarily because the leadership didn't have the right qualifications, but it was because of what the leadership was perceived to be associated with in terms of what had been happening.
It
Or
was
it both?
It was a toxic combination of both.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. And as a result of that, what you would see at the point I was joining the organization, there were serious problems in terms of decision making, because the journalists within the newsroom were used to being given instructions, and they would have to wait to be told what to do, because previously, whatever they tried to do in terms of journalistic practice was changed, either at the point of broadcasting or at the point where the content was being produced. And therefore, they had to wait to be given instructions to be able to do what they were meant to do.
Can you just talk about that structure, the reporting structure at that time? Because I believe that there was a point where journalists, if they had to refer anything upward, they had to go to the COO at the time. And I just want to understand now, currently, what are the reporting lines? If I'm a journalist and I have a story to tell and I believe there's some form of criminality and I need to run this by my superiors, who would that journalist go to?
Ordinarily, the reporting lines are such that you will start with your editors, your line managers. And if there's something else that needs to be dealt with that cannot be dealt with at that level, it gets escalated to the next level. And at a point where it gets to me, I then try and deal with whatever that's being raised. And if I feel that there's a point that I need to raise, that would go straight to the editor-in-chief, which is the current group executive, the current group CEO,
So
as
where,
editor-in-chief.
sorry.
At the point I was joining the SABC, that had been restored, because there was a stage when the reporting lines were changed for the group executive of news, and that person was supposed to report to the COO instead of the CEO.
Yes.
But when I joined, it had already been taken back to the group
All right.
CEO.
Okay, thank you. Yes, you may continue. You were still highlighting those.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
Ms.
yes.
Newman. Maybe it might help to give us a picture of the structure in the, I don't know if newsroom is the right word, say that you would have the journalists in the field, and then the next level before it comes to you. So one has a sense of the various levels.
The current setup is that you have journalists that report to, if you are dealing with general news, you report directly to the National Assignments Editor. If you report to the specialist desks, you'd be reporting to your editor, either your economics editor or your foreign editor or your sports editor or your politics editor. And we also have editors in the regions that we call regional editors, the 10 offices that we have across the country. It's 9 plus 10, which is our Pretoria office that has its own regional editor. So in that environment, the regional editors would report to one of the general managers, which is radio news head. And the specialist desks editors would be reporting to your TV news head. And the current affairs editor, who deals with the long-form content that SABC produces, also reports to one of the two, either your television or your radio head. And the digital news editor reports to the television news editor. And it's these heads of the division or of the units that report directly to me. And then I report to the COO in terms of my operational responsibilities.
Yes.
And for upward referral editorially,
Yes.
I report to the GCO.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. We're still continuing with the environment. Other matters that you want to highlight when you arrived at the SABC?
Where I make reference to the leadership not being trusted and having no legitimacy, I make reference to lack of sense of ownership in the newsroom. So in an environment where you have breaking news stories on a frequent basis, it wasn't clear who was supposed to direct the process because people were walking on eggshells. No one wants to make a decision because no one is sure if I take this decision, especially on political stories. You're not sure whether you are doing the right thing or you will be reprimanded for making the decisions you make. So as a result of that, there was a serious sense of ownership, lack of ownership in the newsroom as a result of that environment. Yeah.
Was your understanding or your sense when you arrived that for a long time, journalists may have had decisions that they needed to make themselves professionally interfered with by people who had no business interfering with them, to the extent that they may have had to make a decision. If I want to continue working here, I must forget about trying to do what I believe I'm supposed to do, because I will be, somebody will override what I am saying, and therefore I must just wait for them to tell me, and then I'll do what they tell me, because that's the only way I can continue to be here.
There was a strong sense of that in the system. And you would be talking to journalists and they would be telling you that there were times when you'd be sitting as a producer in the newsroom, no, in the control room, which is more like our cockpit, if you think about a plane. And these are the people who are responsible for taking news content to air, which is your broadcast, your live broadcast. So you are sitting there as a producer, and then comes a call. Ordinarily, calls that go to the control room are calls within the system in the newsroom. It's either the person who's sitting in the newsroom who's telling you that there's an update on a script or something else has been added to the bulletin. But these would be calls from external parties telling the producers not to put certain content on air or to change stories that are currently running.
Yes.
And that in a world where things are organized, that wouldn't happen, because that person, whoever calls from, if I were to call from outside directly into the production room or whatever you call it, so that is not normal, because I should at least be calling you or calling a journalist or calling an editor, but not your producers.
It's very abnormal to have external parties having access to the control room.
Yes.
Your reference to external, is that a reference to external to the control room, but internal within the SABC, or external to SABC, or both?
Both.
Both. So people from outside the SABC could just phone through to the control room and say, don't do this, don't do that, or do that.
Yes, correct.
And sometimes people within SABC but who should not really be giving instructions to the control room would do that.
Yes, they would be giving instructions to the newsroom. And yet the editorial prerogative
Yes.
resides with the newsroom.
Yes. And of course, certainly those within the SABC would be knowing what the right thing is. They would be knowing the policy,
Yes,
and they would be going against it in full knowledge of what it is.
correct.
Yes. And I think you've covered up to page 88. I'm not sure whether I've left out anything there, playing safe and all that. I think page 8.9, you're dealing with no clear lines of command to journalists. At page 4 of your statement. Okay.
Does 8.9 look like it's two sentences put together without a full stop? No clear lines of command as journalists on and off the field were getting instructions from everywhere, internal and external. It's the point you have just made, or
That's
part of
correct.
it?
Yes, that's what I've just.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
there were no clear lines of command for journalists. That's one.
Yes.
The second is journalists were getting instructions from everywhere, internal and externally.
That's correct.
Yes, okay.
Yes. Could you just deal with what you deal with your overall assessment of what was happening, where you deal with that in paragraph 10, where you deal with battered news brand with no credibility? This is something that one of the witnesses for the SABC, Mr. Sundaram, once dealt with. How does news lose credibility?
Credibility with audiences and with citizens in this case, because that's our primary stakeholder as a news service. It's lack of trust in our content. And with all that has been reported about the SABC, the instructions that were given about some content or certain visuals that were not supposed to be shown for whatever reason that was given at that time, all of that goes against the SABC's editorial policy, because we are supposed to report truthfully and we're supposed to reflect our content with accuracy. And part of that obliges us not to conceal information that we are aware of as journalists. So the issue of credibility comes with a lot of that and adherence to journalism ethics, which we violated in this case. So where you don't have transparency and your content can't be trusted, your credibility goes.
Here. And then at page 5, you deal now with the policy environment. You've touched upon the editorial policy, but just tell the chairperson how. But
maybe before that, I think she makes the point, you make the point that the situation was so bad that journalists were actually afraid to disclose who they worked for. Is that right?
Yes.
Because
that's a sense of shame
would,
that people had working.
That's how bad it
yes.
was.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Could you then deal with what you deal with at page 5, the policy environment?
Let me start by making reference to the editorial policy itself and the mandate of the SABC newsroom. We exist primarily for the benefit of the citizens of the country. Our work talks to their needs in terms of information and news content. And when I came in, I couldn't find a sense that the purpose of our existence had influence in the decisions that we're making as a newsroom. And you couldn't find a sense that as the stories were being discussed in our diary sessions, there was reference to why we needed to do the stories that we were doing. And the transgressions that were in the system editorially where because there is no system that holds anyone to account for such. You know that the editorial policy exists, you know that we are violating it, but there's nothing that says, should you transgress, this is what's going to happen to you, or these are the steps that you have to go through. There's nothing specific to that effect.
There was no mechanism.
There was no mechanism to hold anyone to account or to assure and ensure adherence to the policy.
Does saying there was no mechanism include saying you couldn't go to anybody who, in terms of the policy, was supposed to be informed if there were transgressions, and that person was given power to take action? Does it include saying that, or there would always be somebody to go to, but whether anything could be done might be something else?
It's something that was spoken of casually, but there was never any action taken for things that are known to be against the SABC editorial policy.
Is that because of the level of seniority of the transgressors in the organization? Or is that simply because there was no mechanism? So, I mean, sometimes if you reach a certain level, you might say, well, there is nobody to report so and so to. Is that the kind of situation? Or is the situation that there might have been somebody to report to, but maybe the journalists knew that it wouldn't bring any results because that person was himself or herself compromised and was not trusted as a person that could enforce the policy? Or is there something that you never got to understand whether it was applicable?
There were people who were supposed to hold people to account for transgressions, but it was not happening. Sometimes it's because they were not themselves aware that this was a transgression, because this is what I found in the newsroom, that even the editorial policy that we are supposed to adhere to as journalists within the news division, it's something that we never took time to understand and how it relates to the daily decision-making that we get involved in as editors. So the people who were there, who were supposed to hold people to account, were either not fully knowledgeable about what needed to be done, or when the issues were raised with them, they did nothing about it. Yeah.
Thank you. And then the next point you make in paragraph 13, that there was no way of measuring the performance of the employees of the SABC. And could you just tell the chair about that and why you felt it's a necessary point to make, and to perhaps put measures to make sure that it happens?
The issue of performance management, this is how you assess the performance of your staff. When you realize that there are gaps in their skills or what they are required to know to do the job, you provide interventions. But the fact that the performance management system does not exist is a problem, because you are not able to assist staff that's meant to be assisted because you don't even know what they don't know. So you can't provide the kind of support that's required. Even when you can see that there are glaring gaps in the performance, but there's nothing you can do because it's not systematically recorded. You have no way of saying, based on A, B, C, and D, I am able to provide this support because I have seen the gaps and they are visible in the performance of the employee.
And is that linked to the point that you make, that there was then no productivity monitoring? Because you don't know how the performance is measured, you don't know what your employees are doing, it's difficult to even measure productivity levels.
It's not only about individual productivity. is also linked to the quantity of the content that's required for all our systems on any day. So if you have journalists that are sitting in provinces, you should know that for 2 journalists that are on duty today, or let's say this week, if you're going to take it over 7 days, this is the level of productivity that we expect from these journalists for the next 7 days. You are not able to do that because there's no monitoring mechanism. And as a result, we end up with content slippages in the system because there are stories that get gathered from all over the country that never get broadcast because no one knows where the stories are sitting as they come from the provinces, and no one tracks that when they land in Auckland Park, this is the process to be followed. These stories are going to SABC 1, these stories are going to SABC 2, or these stories are going to SABC 3, depending on the languages that are requiring the content. And these stories are going to be on our radio stations, depending on the language requirements as well. Or these stories are going to be residing on digital only because in the way they've been gathered, they are mostly suited to that platform. But there's also content that's going to be coming from radio and TV that goes online. So there is no monitoring of productivity in that sense. So it affects the entire system.
Okay. Thank you. And you deal, again, with something that I think the next witness is going to deal with also, relating to recruitment and remuneration of freelancers. But can you just talk to that? Why is it a problem, if it is a problem?
The problem with not having a filtering recruitment mechanism for freelancers is that, so you get to see editors or executive producers that bring people into the system because they trust them, they've met them elsewhere, or they've seen them doing work. But when they get into the system, there are no checks as to whether these people are even qualified for the roles they get to fill. These people are expected to perform to the same standards as permanent employees, and therefore you expect some filtering mechanism to get them into the system, either through qualifications. All the checks that we do for permanent employees, they don't exist for our freelancers. So they get into the system in a different way. But linked to that, the way they are remunerated is also not, similar to the way they get into the system, is also not linked to any mechanism as to the grading of their payments, as in this one is at entry level, this one is at professional, this one is at expertise level. There is no such. So there's a subjective process in how these people are paid. So you'd find a person who performs at entry level earning very high, and a person who's performing at a very high standard earning very low, because it's a subjective process, and it depends on who brought you there.
Thank you. And then you deal with the invitations of editors and journalists by government departments and agencies, and you list them, embassies and businesses. What is expected of a journalist? If a journalist gets an invitation that there is something happening within the department
I've lost you, Ms. Norman, in terms of
it's
pages.
we are on page 6, Chair,
Okay.
starting from the last paragraph 16. Page 5, it goes on to page 6. Sorry, are you there, Ms. Magopeni?
Yes, I am.
Oh, thank you. Could you just talk to that? If a journalist gets an invitation that you would like you to come and cover a wedding or something, what are they expected to do? Or maybe cover an occasion or event that a particular department is hosting?
In a normal environment, such invitations should come straight to editors, to the central system, because it is in that system where we assess the editorial value of honoring this invitation and how it's going to assist us to serve the public. But in the way things were happening, individual journalists were getting invitations, and I'm expected to approve these invitations because they are sent to them. And what this means is that you could easily have influences that are coming from different directions and with no control to ensure that there is no interference in the way these journalists are invited. And not only journalists, some of the invitations go straight to editors. And the danger with that is that it weakens our editorial controls because we have no say in how this journalist was handpicked by either a department or an agency or an embassy or any other structure that's outside the SABC system. So this is not a story that's assigned from within, where you would know that this story needs to be dealt with by the economics desk, or this story needs to be dealt with by the politics desk. It's coming from outside, prescribing who should cover it. And this is where our problem lies. Because the different forms of interference come through these invitations, which is not only political interference, commercial interference also comes through these invitations.
So if the journalist wants to make more money, gets invited to a wedding, goes cover that and makes more money from that, what is wrong with that?
It goes against our editorial system and is in violation of journalistic ethics.
Okay, thank you.
Because the choice is made by somebody from outside the newsroom and certainly outside the SABC, and that person could be having certain interests in the story and may well do certain things to try and get the story to be told in a certain way. And whereas if there is simply a request that a journalist be sent, and it's the editor or whoever within the SABC who chooses which journalist should go there, then there is less room for any undue influence. Is that right?
Yes, correct, sir.
Yes.
And in fact, in some of the cases, it's not only about managing controls, it's also to do with the fact that we have journalists who are sitting in provinces who never get these opportunities to be invited to these international trips. So by saying we need to centralize the system, it's also to open up the system to other people who are sitting in other provinces. So we would know that so-and-so is very strong on covering arts and culture, and pick that person from a different province and say, you should take this trip, if it comes through our centralized system. But if a person is handpicked from outside, that makes our job difficult. And in fact, we have started rejecting some of them.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I see that it's time for the long adjournment.
Okay, we'll take the lunch adjournment and we'll resume at 2 o'clock.
Thank
We
you.
adjourn.
Thank you.
All rise.